Thank you all for joining us today. We can go through some updates or the updates from Beanstalk Farms, and I believe today the meat or the most of the discussion will be with regards to the two BIPs that will be reproposed. Guy, how's everything at your end?
Hey, Mod, doing well. Don't have too much to say on this end apart from the couple of bips, so happy to summarize those, and perhaps after a couple folks give updates, we can start some discussion about it. But I think I had mentioned in previous weeks that the hope was to repropose the budget and Seraph BIP alongside some other Beanstalk upgrades, but I think that we've sort of done some thinking about our internal processes around the various stages of having these BIPs in audit versus internal review, and want to make sure we do those the right way rather than the fastest way possible. So perhaps those other BIPs that have been in the weekly updates for the last couple weeks, like the sunrise changes and the withdrawal timer, would be ready sometime later next month. So with regards to the couple BIP drafts that we shared in the last couple days, there's first the Beanstalk Farms H1 budget BIP, which would be BIP 33. So this is a little bit restructured from the proposal that was initially put up earlier this month or over the holidays. And I think that just a couple core differences to point out is, one, this proposes to mint both the Q1 and Q2 budgets for Beanstalk Farms as part of the same BIP, while also preserving the DAO's ability to withhold funding from Beanstalk Farms on a quarterly basis. So there's a little bit more detail in the proposal that I hope everyone has a chance to read over the next couple of days. But the concept is that the DAO would be able to propose a BOP to prevent Beanstalk Farms from using any Q2 funding upon the completion of Q1, if the DAO so desires. With regards to the amounts, I think the 400K that's proposed for Q1 will be able to fund the existing team, Beanstalk Farms, through the end of Q1, and the Q2 budget of 950,000 will really allow us to capitalize on some of the increased interest from a lot of devs and working on Beanstalk, and particularly in the context of the roadmap database that we published a couple days ago. I think that we're going to need some more devs and contributors in order to execute on everything in there, particularly in the context of all the middleware and interfaces to build on top of all the on-chain developments in that roadmap. So that's a little bit about the budget. BIP 34 is almost identical to the initial Seraph BIP, so don't have too much to say there, but hope everyone has a chance to read it and leave some questions and feedback in the channel when they get a chance to do so.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Is that all from your end?
Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks,
All
Matt.
right. I had some follow-up questions maybe regarding the BIP budget, but we can take that maybe after getting some updates from the development team. Silo Chad, how are you doing?
Great, Mod. I'm gonna send a quick message in the Barnyard chat with a list of stuff that we've been working on. But first, would love to welcome KXO, who's here with us today. He's gonna be joining us for the month of February to work on a number of projects, starting with some work on wells. So thanks for being here and for joining the team. And I think to go back to something Guy was saying, at least from my perspective, have seen a significant uptick in interest in Beanstalk and working on Beanstalk from a development standpoint over the last couple of weeks. And I think we have a really unique opportunity to go continue growing the team and working on lots of new things. So yeah, as always, like if you encounter developers who would like to work on Beanstalk, send them my way. But expect to continue growing over the next couple of months. So welcome, KXO.
Thank you, Chad. And and welcome KXO. Chad, just for those who may listen to this recording, did you want to read maybe quickly your message, or would you like me to read it?
Yeah, I can go through these. So lots of outstanding PRs that are being reviewed currently, and some stuff that's been shipped over the last week. So just to walk through the message, sort of on the core repo, we have an outstanding PR that adds basically uses the Beanstalk SDK for swaps in the Beanstalk UI. And so what this change will allow is to start, you can swap between more token pairs straight from Beanstalk. So for example, if you want to swap between stables, that's now supported. But what this really does is open up the basically anytime we add more swap paths to the SDK, for example, with wells, those will automatically be incorporated into that swap page without any additional work. So super excited about that. And this is one of the first big steps of getting some of this SDK work that's been happening over the past couple of months integrated into the interface. Beanstalk has been working on this claim into X feature set, which does two things. The first thing is it makes some upgrades to some of the token inputs throughout the website to make them more clear about what's going on with respect to circulating and farm balances, which is something that we've got a lot of feedback about over the last couple of months. And then secondarily, it enables the functionality to claim various types of beans from around the farm and simultaneously do another action. So an example would be if you have harvestable pods, you can claim and deposit those in one, or harvest and deposit those rather, in one transaction. And all of that's pre-built for you, and it's just as simple as flicking a switch. That applies to silo withdrawals and rinsable sprouts and that kind of stuff as well. So really excited about that. It's the first major implementation in the UI of taking advantage of what the farm functionality has to offer in terms of composing these types of transactions. So lots more to come from that perspective. Breen and I are also doing a code review of the Sunrise improvements BIP ahead of that going out and making some tweaks and changes there. Notably across the stack, we've been working really hard to clean up documentation and variable names and all of these different things to, on one front, help onboard new developers, and then secondarily to help auditors like Halborn dig into the code more effectively. So this is something we've been really paying a lot of attention to, and I think if you go take a look at the Wells code base, you'll see a pretty an improvement in attention to detail that I think is something we want to embed across all of the code that Beanstalk Farms puts out. There's a link to a list of all the PRs that have gone out this week as well. So if anybody's curious, you can always go look at that to kind of see what's moving. And there's always a lot of little stuff that we're working on in between. On the Wells front briefly, so I linked the commit hash that was sent to Halborn. They've begun their review, and we did a demo with them again this week to just kind of go through a couple specific components. So they have the info they need and are actively working on this. And then currently we're working on additional PRs on the Wells repo related to some of the factories and registries which will deploy Wells. Notably, this Aquifers PR is out, which is a permissionless well registry. And then we're also working on Aqueducts, which is the permissioned form of that. So no timeline for those yet, but if you want to take a look at the code, it's on that PR. So yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. Happy to answer any questions about those things, but lots of stuff moving.
Thank you, Chad. Sweet Red Beans.
Hey, Mod. I'll keep my update short this week, but finished sort of a prototype for the field Dutch auction adjustments that are coming up in a future BIP. So this is the morning state that Breen has spent a bunch of time working on. So the UI for that is finished at this point. And then I think I mentioned this. Well, I've been mentioning this, but mentioned this last week that I'm sort of working on generalizing the depth chart that I've been working on for the pod marketplace to see if we can get the view to work with a different asset than pods. So currently attempting to reuse those existing components to see if we can build a prototype for a Bitcoin futures market. And sort of the goal here is to identify, how generalizable we want to be with sort of the componentry that we're working with. So that's kind of it from my end.
Thank you, Sweet Red. All right. Maybe we can go back to the main, or let's say the BIP discussion. And Publius, this question might maybe directed to you, or is directed to you. Two important BIPs, in my opinion. One has to do with the development of Beanstalk, and the other has to do with its security. And maybe the shared topic between them both is governance, and how governance decides basically on those BIPs. What are your thoughts, first of all, on those BIPs, and how would you recommend or say the DAO in general approaches the BIPs?
So, in general, we have always tried to refrain from explicitly supporting any BIPs in particular, and we will continue to not tell people how to vote, but we do try, and throughout the history of Beanstalk, I guess in varying capacities, have tried to participate in the discussion around specific BIPs. And with that being said, as a preface, really do feel like both of the BIPs that are being effectively reproposed, in that they were already proposed and failed once, present a pivotal moment for the Beanstalk protocol and for the DAO, in that, and the two BIPs are distinctly different. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why this is an important moment for Beanstalk, because last time they both failed in relatively similar votes, and it almost indicates a lack of real discussion or diversity in how BIPs are being received, and people are perhaps just on board or not on board with the general direction that things are going. And it almost seems like the Siraf BIP and the budget BIP are so different that the fact that they were voted on so similarly is indicative of something that's probably not very healthy about the system at the moment. And this is something that we've spoken about recently, how the governance system does this. These are the types of situations that in practice the current governance system is likely to create. And from that perspective, there's something to be said for a revamped system of governance in general. And as Beanstalk shifts back to on-chain governance, this will be an opportunity for the DAO to implement a better, hopefully better system of governance. But at the end of the day, there is a trade-off between resistance to change, which if Beanstalk is to become the issuer of money, it needs to be difficult to change, and the ability to iterate or get lost or left in the dust by others that are innovating. And at this point in time, without commenting on these BIPs specifically, I feel like Beanstalk is very far from the place where it can really ossify, and changes at the protocol level become few and far between. And so from that perspective, it is really important that the DAO continues to have meaningful discussions on BIPs, and that there is meaningful participation in voting for and against BIPs, or I guess for and abstaining from BIPs in practice. But the point is that there does need to be a way to continue to iterate on the protocol at this point in time. And if Beanstalk is unable to be changed at all going forward because of lack of participation, that is going to be a big problem. So that's where Beanstalk currently sits, and would just really participate in discussion, constructive discussion around both of the BIPs separately, and this is an important time for.
Sorry, Publius, I think you cut off towards the end, or just the last bit. I'm not sure if it's just me. Maybe others can confirm.
Where did I lose you guys? Apologies.
Just the last sentence.
Was just saying that this is a very important moment for Beanstalk, and really hope that people treat it as such.
Okay, Guy, can you maybe give us timelines on the BIPs? So right now the channels are open for discussion. When can we expect them to be proposed? And tell us again how long is the voting period? And then lastly, maybe what is the current status of Beanstalk Farms with regards to the budget that's available, and how long is the amount that is left basically for it if this BIP again doesn't pass?
Sure. So I guess to answer your first question, I mean, the BIPs can be proposed at any time. I think it's relatively good practice to have those discussion channels open for at least a week, and it's all flexible. So if we find that there's a lot of discussion and particular feedback about particular parts of each of the BIPs, sometime early next week, perhaps that would be grounds for waiting a bit longer. But barring that, I think it would be reasonable to expect the proposals, call it mid next week or something like that. With regards to your latter question, in the context of Beanstalk Farms funding, believe that we have enough beans to pay everyone through the middle of next month and partially through the end of February, is my understanding at the moment. Let me know if I didn't answer a part of your question or not. Don't quite remember.
No, I think this is clear. All right, I'll pause here and see if any members or those who are in the DAO wanted to say something. I also see, Publius, that you unmuted yourself. Maybe did you want to comment?
Something worth saying is that in general, from day one, we've been vehemently opposed to any sort of tax or something that would perpetually fund development of the protocol. But these types of frictions around paying for development, like hearing guys say that Beanstalk Farms can only pay people for another couple of weeks, that is far and away, in our opinion, the biggest existential risk to Beanstalk. That all the people that are currently working day and night on Beanstalk suddenly lose funding because of lack of agreement of the DAO. That would be horrible. And so at the margin, we've always been proponents of the idea of having quarterly or at least regularly, but in practice it's been quarterly budget, such that the DAO really has a close eye on what is being worked on and how much money is being spent on it, which is really important from a checks and balances perspective. But these types of frictions and dangers that are introduced from that type of system make it certainly worth considering some sort of percentage of all future bean mints, or up to some number of beans, go towards funding development. And that may be one or multiple organizations that can access that funding. But if you think about, for example, the work that the Ethereum Foundation is doing within the Ethereum community, if the Ethereum Foundation was uncertain about funding on a quarterly basis, it's impossible to imagine them being nearly as effective as they have been in practice. So this is a larger discussion. I think that the shift towards a a 5-month proposal for funding for Beanstalk Farms is a significant change from what's been happening, which is quarterly funding, and in general would really encourage people to participate in discussion on the best way to fund development going forward, and see that thus far there really hasn't been any discussion on that thread, and think that's a problem. So would just really encourage everyone to figure it out together. This is really important.
Thank you, Publius. And I would maybe add is that while, for example, personally, while there is no doubt that the development of Beanstalk wouldn't stop, or they will have contributors who will continue to stand in there, and we've had that experience before where we've seen it happen. We may not want to take things like that for granted. It's also a bit unrealistic, or we also don't want those who are contributing or developing to have to worry and think about things like that. It's like, how much longer do we have a budget? How much longer is that thing? And it is more ideal, or the better, let's say, for it is to have all of that focus put towards developing, and not have to worry about other things such as what we were talking about, the budget and how long the budget is there. Okay, I'm going to pause again here, see if there are any comments or anyone who would like to join the discussion, and we can talk more about it. The last thing, maybe, Guy, that I wanted to mention is that there are office hours that are proposed. Did you want to maybe remind or mention them? When are those there, and when can others join and ask maybe more questions or other questions?
Sure. I had a quick thought before getting to that. Just thinking about the amount and quality of the discussion, not just with regards to the budget BIP, but also with regard to the roadmap. And for those that are listening, the link is at community.bean.money/roadmap. And it's not as if we've had the opportunity to write paragraphs and paragraphs about each item in there, and feel like it is sufficiently dense and technical such that it's not totally possible to read that once or twice and completely understand what's going on. So I feel like that document in particular is really important to ask questions about what it is, each item that is hoping to get worked on, and why. Both here in the DAO meetings and in class and in Discord. So just wanna highlight that as well. But to answer your question, Mod, yes. So hopefully it's clear that all of us want to make ourselves as available as possible to answer questions, both live over voice and async over Discord chat. But myself, Sweetyard Beans, and Silo Chad will be sitting here in the barnyard for a couple different times over the next week to answer any questions. If folks are listening to this recording later and can't make this time, hopefully there is a time that you're able to make over the next few days. So I think in Pacific time, those times would be noon tomorrow. Myself, Chad, and Red Beans will be here, and then 7 p.m. on Monday. And those times are time zone adjusted in the announcements channel, so you can check out what time that would be in your time zone. And so hopefully those are just ability to serve as more off the record conversations if folks want to come ask questions that for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable asking here or anything like that.
Thank you, Guy. Pizza Man says that maybe the problem is just the general lack of voting or participation, and that people forget about crypto for a while, and just given the conditions, let's say, of the market. And they suggest, or maybe they're thinking, is that having a system where a smaller percent of stock is required to pass BIPs would count towards reaching the threshold for future votes. And I think this is something, or a point that Publius mentioned, and that is that you had two BIPs that were completely separate, yet both of them had the same amount of voter participation. Any thoughts maybe on how we would want to maybe spread the word around or raise awareness on the BIPs. I guess one thing is to encourage those who are with us or those who are within the community is to reach out to other members who you know of and tell them, encourage them to vote, tell them that the BIPs are out there, and again encourage them to encourage others again to vote. I see Tyler B and Pizza Man are typing, so we'll wait for their comments or questions. Tyler B says that maybe people are not as interested in voting or on things as before, and we should listen to what the DAO wants the farm to work on possibly and have compromises. So go back again, Tyler B, with the notion is that you had two BIPs that were separate, yet they had the same amount of participation. Nevertheless, what do you think is what are the things that you think the farm wants, or what do you personally want, for example?
Yeah, just to bring it back to the discussion about the level of discussion, it's really impossible to know what those things are without people talking about it. To Tyler B's comment in the Barnyard chat.
Pizza Man suggests maybe changes on how BIPs pass or are passed, but keep in mind, Pizza Man, that for any change to happen anyways, you need a BIP to pass with the current status or requirements. Nevertheless, even though some of these changes may happen, the idea is to still make it relatively difficult for Beanstalk to change. So that is by design. But going back again to it is that even if we want to make changes to governance, we still have to pass it with the current requirements. Mr. Moshi has some comments, and they're thinking some ideas on top of their head. So the participation should be rewarded. So stock voting power should start low and gain with each participation until a given ceiling. If I understand this correctly, so the more you vote, the more your stock counts. Is that correct, Mochi? Maybe you can correct me if I'm mistaken. B, inactive voting stock should receive less weight and quorum. So this is the opposite of the previous point. C, within each voting epoch, last-minute votes should receive less voting power to prevent sudden sway's direction. And D, abstain is changed to against.
So I can maybe share a couple thoughts on a few of those that I might have offhand. With regards to the comments about or questions about having BIPs pass as a function of the majority vote or participation being rewarded, would have to think about it more. But the attack vector I think of is once there is a more on-chain governance structure, how do you mitigate someone proposing 10,000 bips and just at the cost of gas to dilute others' voting powers or voting power rather. So that would be something to think about. I think voting power tapering off later in the voting period is an interesting thought. And with regards to the voting choices, as per the feedback that some folks had in the community, the Seraph BIP does add against as a voting choice for BIPs, although it serves no function other than someone indicating their dissent in the sense that not voting abstain, or voting against has no effect on the outcome currently. That is.
My comment on the voting power dilutes with time is that this is part of the voting, so I'd expect everyone that votes and participates to have that expectation, is that at the last minute, everyone can come in and vote, and you'd expect them to vote as is. Nevertheless, Mochi, do you know if such a system is implemented anywhere? Do you know who or someone that use such voting system, and what were the outcomes there? And just one last reminder again is that while these topics are interesting for us to think about, governance in general, it still does not change the fact that for any changes to be made, we still have to abide by the current rules. Tyler B says, and that's a response to what is it that you think or want the farm to work on. So they say that they're not sure what everyone wants, but their guess is that people are losing their interest because most people are expecting bean to be above peg and print beans. It hasn't been the case in a while, and they're personally happy to see what's going on, but most people are impatient. So I'm not sure, again, Tyler B, that there is substance here. Like these are not things that you can act on, or there is nothing here.
There is a great point here, which is that if Beanstalk is unable to survive periods of time where it doesn't print beans for months at a time because funding dries up, that is a major problem with the system. So given that Beanstalk is designed to function around human nature, this is something that really does have to be factored into the governance model and the development funding model as a whole. This is like a very important point, and appreciate Tyler B for shouting it out. Although agree it doesn't point to what should be worked on that front. Feel like putting out a roadmap of the detail that was recently put out is an important step in facilitating discussion around what can and should be built. But yeah, this is Tyler B is highlighting a major problem with the current system, which is that if people are just going to vote based on bean mints, that is a big problem, particularly if it means there's not going to be funding for development, which in practice is necessary, or if not necessary, is certainly highly likely to help get to a point where the system is printing again. So it's a big problem if the positive feedback loop stops.
Thank you, Publius. And Mochi expands a bit on their thoughts. So they're thinking that yes, or what they were saying before is that the voting power or let's say a stockholder's voting power increases with regards to their participation. So the more you participate, then the more active or free power that you have, up to a ceiling, as they said. The other point with regards to the looting, and this is the opposite of the first one, and their reasoning is that you may have stockholders of people with beans that they just lost them. So they're inactive or lost, and then that becomes problematic with regards to reaching quorum. And C, with the last question, Mochi, my point was with your suggestion that those who vote towards or just before the voting period ends, that vote gets diluted. And my question was if you have seen this being implemented in somewhere that we can look into maybe more of, or see if there are any lessons learned there. Albin asks, is there any way to decouple people's emotional reaction to market activity from governance participation?
Well, you can't really affect how people vote, but what you can do is create incentives for them to vote, or costs if they don't participate. A concept that we've been thinking about is having the system have like a built-in forking mechanism where people have to signal for each BIP whether or not they want to stay on the old version or move to the new version. And if they don't opt to move to the new version, they just stay in the old version. And that is problematic in the sense that the system may split up many times, which is not healthy for the network effect of the system, but is in practice closer to the L1 fork model, where if there is a disagreement on how to proceed, the system ends up separating into two systems. And that may be the direction that Beanstalk has to go if there is no way to create a governance system that is both resistant to manipulation and able to iterate or maybe balance iteration and ossification much better.
Publius, would you think or say that delegating votes or having the ability to delegate your vote would be an approach to consider before that? And in general, what are your thoughts about delegating votes?
So historically, we have not been proponents of delegation because we prefer a wider distribution of governance decision making. But it's worth considering when it comes to participation. If there are smaller farmers that simply don't have the bandwidth or don't, for whatever reason, pay attention to governance, that want to still participate with the community and signal voting for a lot, support for, maybe someone that they nominate to vote on their behalf, that's reasonable, and I think that snapshot supports that already. So in theory, that could be implemented at any time, but I think it would probably require a BOP or should go through some governance before it's implemented, although technically don't think it would require any sort of change to Beanstalk to actually facilitate at this point. But it's definitely worth considering.
And Sync shared a link to a previous post of theirs about vote delegation for others who are interested in the topic.
Albie, not sure if you're at a mic, but I feel like it would be awesome if you want to ask live.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if this has been discussed before already or not, but basically the grammar of the BIPs is effectively saying, should we do X? And then there's a minimum amount of votes required to make that happen, right? And then if there's no participation or not enough people participate, nothing happens. Conversely, if people are like really against it, all they can really do is hope that their lack of participation outnumbers people that participate, right? Versus switching the grammatical question of the BIPs to something like, hey, pick between A and B. And then A or B must happen. It's just which one will happen depends on the vote.
I mean, in practice, that is already what happens. And so I guess that's why you're saying change the framing of the questions of the BIPs. It is worth saying that the reason why there was only ever an ability to vote for BIPs is because that is the simplest, like, logical implementation of this system. But if in practice there is a desire to lower the quorum such that people have to vote in favor or against the BIPs, or as you're proposing X or Y, it's not really so much the framing as the logical implementation of it that will matter in practice. But I think what you're really asking about has to do with whether or not there should be a quorum of some sort, right?
You're right. That's it. Why not just implement a simple majority?
You're saying without a quorum.
Correct.
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering, or at least lowering the quorum significantly.
In other words, the people that are interested in DAO governance are the ones that are actively showing up to the votes. So let the majority between that group dictate what happens.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the point of intentionally making it difficult to pass BIPs, but maybe this is an approach to be considered at a later stage of Beanstalk's life and not currently, if that makes sense. So lower it now and then raise it after some point.
This is Sync. I had a question. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, and I think I posted in the governance channel too. So for a BOP, or my understanding is BIPs are a 50% quorum because there's an execution of code, and in terms of budgets, to mint beans, that's you're doing a diamond cut to mint the beans, right? So, but I suggested that perhaps the DAO reframes how it looks at budget proposals specifically, because if we look at a budget proposal as a BOP, hypothetically, a BOP has a 35% quorum requirement, and it's not easy to get 35%. But given the engagement from stockholders at the moment, that seems to be around where we're at, 35-40%, give or take, on some of these recent votes. So in terms of from an operational perspective, one of the things I was thinking about is, can we allow for certain types of budget proposals to qualify as BOPs with a 35% quorum requirement if the budget proposals under a certain amount? So I don't know what that amount would be. To Guy's point about you don't want to make it easy for any Joe Blow to come in and ask for 500,000 beans, right? That's a valid point. But what does the DAO think about that? Because operationally, to what Publius was saying earlier, it doesn't really work for the protocol to have to operate in this manner, where every few months, you need 50% stockholder engagement to keep things running. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if that is something people have thought about, but it may require like these budgets to be framed in smaller parts, so that each like the engineering team's budget would fall under, if it falls under a certain amount, or maybe you can even, that would qualify as a BOP, and then, separately the design team's budget. And so, until we get back to that point where, we have stockholder engagement actively, maybe then at that point, when there's 50% plus people showing up at these votes, then we can, lump all these proposals back into one proposal as a BIP. So that's just my, wanted to throw that out there.
From our perspective, feel pretty strongly that it's much better to come up with an overall governance solution or implementation that handles every situation, as opposed to creating specific governance parameters for different types of things. It's certainly worth discussing or considering. But in general, have a negative reaction to that type of proposal.
Yeah, worth mentioning that may solve the budget, but doesn't solve, for example, the setup BIP. Pizza Man suggested that we spearhead the discussion of changing the BIP or how BIPs are there, and Publius suggested that we have a call dedicated to discuss this next week. So we can either have it a dedicated call. It could also be maybe during class or during the next DAO meeting. We'll see what folks think the best time to have that call is, and we'll schedule it and announce it.
I have a good question. Can we clarify what the process is for change with regards to BIPs? Because there's a lot of people proposing things. There's a lot of ideas. And I personally have this feeling that most of the DAOs are looking to the leadership team, if there is such a thing, to basically say like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We'll move forward with that, propose it, and submit it. And I also have another sneaking suspicion that the quote unquote leadership team is constantly pushing against being a leadership team and wants the DAO to kind of self-govern. And I want to just raise this question to make sure that, you know, we don't have two camps looking at each other, waiting for the other one to act. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I feel like you're highlighting a major friction point for us, which is that people are obviously looking to us as Publius for guidance on how to move forward here. And we ultimately don't want to be the provider of the answer. We are happy to participate in constructive discussion to get to the answer. But to your point, Albin, it really can't be that we or Silo Chad or Mochi or Mod or anyone in particular is responsible or viewed as responsible for coming up with or even indicating support for a given solution, and instead really challenge everyone to step up and participate in the discussion. And we will participate in the call the Pizza Man suggested, and hope that many others do and come to bring their ideas bring their ideas and their opinions and engage substantively, and hopefully we can together come to some sort of conclusion or at least an answer for now. And am less concerned about someone actually drafting the proposal. I feel like at the end of the day, either Beanstalk Farms can or another community member will. But the real thing that needs to happen is discussion around how governance should function, and that is something that I think, to your point, it's worth getting something specified on the calendar for having this discussion or continuing it, I guess.
Yeah, because I see two problems here. One is we don't have a clear decision-making process, right? People throw ideas, yet there's no clear path towards making a decision and taking action. No one knows who to go to. No one knows how to take an idea and validate it and move it forward through the process of making it come to fruition. So that's problem number one. The decision-making process is not defined at all. And then problem number two, I'm going to guess here because I can't speak for everybody. I'm speaking mostly for myself, and I'm just kind of guessing other people have a similar view, is that should there be some kind of leadership in some sense? Should there be people whose opinions or whose experience matters more, both mainly in helping to drive the decisions, in picking between options and doing something like that, right? Or are we purely 100% totally democratic, where anyone can propose hey, here's an option, here's another option, here's another option, and then everyone is just, the whole DAO is just left to vote for whatever they think feels best. I guess in a way what's happening on these DAO calls is sorry, I was going to say what's happening on these DAO meetings is that there is some discussion about the options from you, Publius, I think from all of you guys, Publius, which I think most of us look to as a source of good thinking and experience and opinions that we could trust, right? But I just wanted to see if that's the right process, if people are aware that should be the process, if
feel very strongly that in practice there should never be some council or group of people that have the ability to change the protocol explicitly, but it is really important to recognize that Beanstalk exists in a social environment, in a human environment, and it is the natural tendency of people to organize themselves in social structures where there is de facto leadership and de facto leaders, and think that in practice, having a well-defined governance system whereby, to your point, Albin, there is no confusion about how someone can actually propose changes to the DAO, and there's a whole well-defined process to go through such that there's as little friction as possible for people to participate in providing an answer. And separately to the question around delegation and just more generally, having leaders in the community feel comfortable speaking about what they think and actually participating in that discussion is important. And perhaps we also need to do a better job of actively participating in BIP discussions more than we have. And to the comment we made earlier in the DAO meeting about how we've really steered away from making explicit recommendations on how to vote for BIPs while participating in the discussion of them, perhaps that's something that should change. And perhaps we should actually express explicit support or not for given changes to the protocol. And you're raising a very interesting question that is worth considering more deeply.
Wanted to comment maybe a bit on the democratic or leadership or leaders, and I think both can exist. So the vote delegates is one of those scenarios where you have factions or people that would basically appoint a leader for them, and those are the ones that they delegate their votes to. But it's not necessarily a leader for the protocol itself, if that makes sense.
I mean, I'm just looking at the past year that I've been around Beanstalk, right? And I've watched and listened to a lot of conversations. I've seen countless examples of people proposing ideas for various things, and the ideas sound great at first. Tons of them, even I was like, "Wow, that's a brilliant idea," right? And then inevitably, when they're discussed on a DAO call, whether it's an engineering thing or whether it's an economic thing, once you have the subject matter experts like the Publiuses or a few other people weigh in, then you see what an awful idea it really is, or not necessarily an awful idea, but some side effect that thing could have when seen through the lens of someone with experience, right? So that's where I always lean towards having someone with that subject matter expertise have a louder voice. They don't have to have the deciding vote, but we really need those voices to be louder than everyone else in some way, shape, or form.
And think that, going back to the original point about some of the work that the Ethereum Foundation has done to support the Ethereum community, creating podcasts and other platforms for some of those voices in the Beanstalk community to really shine through a lot of the noise is important. And this is sort of an iterative problem, which is that currently there isn't enough support for funding those types of things. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 that ultimately the DAO needs to get itself out of through at least one BIP passing that re-implements or implements new governance. So this is what we will see in practice, how these two BIP re-proposals work. But to Pizza Man's point, it's probably really time to figure out a new or amended governance system such that this is not a perpetual problem for the DAO.
Okay, we are on top of the hour, but we can continue this discussion or this meeting for as long as it takes. So we'll pause here again and see if others have any comments. And as always, feel free to just unmute yourself and join the conversation. Mr. Mochi goes back to the comment on the Ethereum Foundation, and they say that the Ethereum Foundation, to their point, they have some sort of a committee that reviews or comments on Ethereum improvement proposals. And then they're asking or thinking is that they imagine Beanstalk would have such a committee as well at some point. Albin asks, what was Ethereum's foundation that they've been around for 9 years? What was it like after the first year? I know Senk is a fan of that bit of history and Assyrian typing, but I believe it was pretty messy at the beginning. And maybe also not to mention that it doesn't mean that maybe Ethereum has the best governance or the perfect governance. So we may look for inspiration, but we'll also want to, maybe think for ourselves, of course. Okay. Any closing thoughts, Publius? And did you want to maybe expand a bit on when do you think is the right time to have a conversation on governance? Do we want to have that as these BIPs are being proposed or being voted on, or would you want to have them maybe after the fact?
Nothing else to add to the discussion at the moment, but think we should. The governance conversation needs to happen independent of how these BIPs are voted on, and therefore feel like in the next couple of days that call should happen. And it's probably going to be the first of many. So if this one wasn't the first of many, then that one will be. So sooner is definitely better than later in this case.
Okay.
Happy to set something up next week.
Yes, great. So Guy will look into maybe scheduling that, whether it's recurring or we take it meeting by meeting, and it will be announced to the rest of the community. Okay, with that, thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, again, there are 2 channels open for the discussion of the Beanstalk Farms budget and the setup BIP. I encourage everyone to join the discussion. There will be office hours where you can talk to contributors and ask them questions about those proposals. And lastly, talk to other farmers or community members that encourage them to vote, and ask them to encourage others to also vote. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next week.